Good evening, everyone. My name is Audrey Davis. I'm the director of the African American History Division for the City of Alexandria and the Office of Historic Alexandria. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Alison Mann. Dr. Mann serves as the historian at the National Museum of American Diplomacy, U.S. Department of State, and she is a subject matter expert in the field of diplomatic history, 19th century American history, public history, and education. Before joining the museum, she was assistant professor of history at the Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College in Tifton, Georgia. She has also taught diplomatic history and the history of American slavery and abolitionism at the University of New Hampshire and Franklin Pierce University, and has worked as a park ranger for the Boston African American National Historic Site. She holds an MA and Ph.D. from the University of New Hampshire and a BA from Rutgers University. For tonight's lecture, The Brutal Truth of 1315 Duke Street Revealed, the 1837 case of Dorcas Allen, Dr. Mann will discuss the traumatic events that occurred at 1315 Duke Street in 1837 and its legal implications and the aftermath, and this story was the basis of her 2010 doctoral dissertation. Without further ado, I give you Dr. Alison Mann.
Okay, I should be on. Good. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. Every time I hear my bio read, I think I'm a jack of all trades. Look at me. I'm a park ranger. I'm a professor. I'm a diplomatic historian. Fortunately, I was trained very well as a historian. So as we tell people, you pivot, right? But this is my first love. And it's not something that I particularly enjoy talking about. And I hadn't thought about it for a number of years. I've been at the State Department now for about 8 years, so fully entrenched in diplomatic history. Today I was working on the Rogers Act of 1924, the creation of the Foreign Service, and I thought, no, pivot, switch, 19th century African American history. Dr. Ben Skolnick had reached out to me about a year ago and told me about the project currently underway at 1315 Duke Street. I think this is one of the most important things that the city of Alexandria can do, is make this open to the public and to talk about what happened at that site for decades and the implication that it had on not only Alexandria history, but Washington, D.C. history, the history of our capital in the years leading up to the Civil War and beyond. So for all of you who are working on it and support it, I really applaud you, and I really thank you for your work. So the story that I'm going to tell you about tonight is a very difficult story to tell. Not only is it very complicated, it's horrific. There's no way to make it nice, and we shouldn't try, right? And we need to be honest about these things and figure out a way that we can talk to the public about this, because I still think that we struggle in talking about the horrors of enslavement. And so I really feel confident that 1315 Duke Street, when it opens, will be able to achieve that. Let me start with this story here. Oh, did I do that? Maybe I didn't. This thing has a mind of its own. Did all of you see 12 Years a Slave? Okay, I figure pretty much everybody did. Sometimes when I was speaking about this, they're like, what? And I said, come on. 2013. So as I sat in the theater and I was watching the movie, I knew it was going to happen. I'd read the book, I had studied it, and I was waiting for him to show up. And sure enough, he did. Within the first 10 minutes, there he was. He is a figure that has confused me and eluded me and enraged me for going on 20 years now, and that is James H. Birch. He was the person responsible for incarcerating Solomon Northup, and Solomon Northup talks about him in his autobiography. That was the only way I had of thinking of him as I started on my research for my dissertation, was the way that Northup described him in 1841. He was a powerful man, a face full of cunning, generally described as a very loathsome individual. So I thought, how is Hollywood going to portray this man? And there he was. I was probably the only person in the theater who was like, there he is. There's that Birch. And he looked exactly what I thought they would make him look like. He's dirty, he's sweaty, he's gross, he is got his sleeves rolled up. You know, he's very much like a working guy. You know, he's in the business of selling slaves, and immediately, of course, he's vulgar, and he beats Solomon Northup in the movie, which, of course, is true to the book. And I found myself thinking, you know, not quite. Because isn't this the thought that we generally have in the general public of what a slave trader looks like? He's dirty, he's coarse, he's vulgar. But in Alexandria in the 1830s and 40s, are they really? Or are they the gentlemen that you sit next to in the restaurant with their fine clothes? And they are the people in the community that the working men look up to and they want to be like. That's who they are, and that's who James Birch was. So why was I so interested in James Birch? When I was a little peanut master's student, I was really interested in John Quincy Adams, right? Because who isn't? And I was reading through his published diary that his son had published, and I was reading about something that he came across in 1837, where he told the story of seeing an auction for a woman who had been a slave, who murdered her children, and now she was up for auction. And he went to the auction, and he was pretty horrified. And then it all kinds of wraps up really quickly. And I thought, what am I reading? This is crazy. Why have I not heard of this before? Has this been buried? What's going on here? Adams is so distraught by this. When he wrote in his diary about it, he wrote something to the effect of, "The horrible matter is over, and I never really want to think about it ever again." This is in 1837. When he is in the midst of, in the House of Representatives, standing up and fighting the gag rule against abolitionist petitions. So he's very active on the Hill, and then also this is going on in his personal life, and it's so horrific he doesn't want to talk about it or think about it anymore. And I thought, gosh, what can John Quincy Adams not handle? Let me try to figure this out. So that's kind of where my journey started. The truth of the matter is, in August of 1837, James Birch purchased a woman, Dorcas Allen, and her 4 children from a man in Georgetown. That same day, he brought them to 1315 Duke Street, which was then owned by George Keppert. And he stashed them there. And fully expecting, I think, to transport them to Natchez because it was getting to be the fall season of harvest, and that would have made sense to me. So I knew that. That same evening, late in the evening, screams were heard, and men rushed into the building, and they found Dorcas Allen attacking her children. She had killed the 2 youngest, a 4-year-old and a baby. All this time, I still cry about it. And the older ones, the 2 girls, they were, I believe, 12 and 10, and they fought her off. But she had killed the infant and the 4-year-old. Back then, when you committed a crime, the night watch was called in. And the night watch was called in, and they brought her before the mayor, and then I believe they brought her to the jail in Alexandria. Obviously, jails were places of incarceration for enslaved people, but since she had committed a crime, I'm pretty sure they would have taken her out of 1315 and then put her in the jail that is now at St. Asaph Street. I think when people think about this, if they know anything about it, they think about Margaret Garner in the story Beloved that Toni Morrison so brilliantly put into her book. Based upon the true story of Margaret Gardner in the 1850s, that's pretty much better known, I think, than this case. And because the abolitionist movement had gained so much traction, we're on the eve of the Civil War. I feel like her case was picked up by the abolitionists and a lot more well-known than the case that I'm talking about. So I just wanted to make that distinction because what I told you probably reminded you of Margaret Gardner. So this is a picture. I just took this the other day, so it's very recent. The building is still there at St. Apphis and Princess Street. You can see that the thing that pretty much remains is the structure. It's condos now, but there's the yard over there. So Dorcas Allen was imprisoned for, I think, about 2.5 months. I couldn't find anything about the trial except the little bit that I could read in John Quincy Adams' diary. It was absolutely maddening to me. And I thought, well, not only am I getting it in his diary, what he thinks happened during that trial came from his cousin, Judge William Cranch, who was the circuit court judge for the entire District of Columbia. They were cousins on his mother's side. I don't think they liked each other very much. Nevertheless, when John Quincy Adams went to that slave auction and he found out that she had killed her children and gone to trial for it and was acquitted, he thought, wait a second, there's no doubt that she killed the children. Why was she acquitted at trial? I don't understand. So he went to his cousin and he asked him what happened. Judge Krantz read him the notes that he had made during the trial. And according to those notes and according to Adams, Dorcas Allen had been acquitted on the reason of insanity. And I thought, insanity? That was not even a defense that was used in 1837. I'm pretty sure that this is one of the first cases in the entire history of the United States for an individual to be acquitted by reason of insanity. It was not something that was commonly used. And so the more that he learned, the more upset that he got. And I thought to myself, this isn't good enough. I need to know. I need to know what was said at that trial. So then I had to go hunt down the papers. You would think that they would have been here in Alexandria somewhere. I'm up in New Hampshire. I don't know where anything is. I go to the Queen Street Library. I'm like, you have those trial papers? They said, LOL, no, we don't have any of that. And I said, well, where would they be? They're like, we're really not sure. Go check at NARA. Not at NARA, right? So I'm like, where could they be? I found them at the Library of Virginia in a dirty box labeled Arlington County Court Records. Not only was it not Arlington County, it was Alexandria County, and after retrocession, that's where it wound up there. So it took me 2 years to find that box, and it was kind of like the Holy Grail, like, whoa, like I was almost afraid to touch it when I finally opened it. And when I opened up the folder and I saw what was in there, I nearly died. It didn't tell me much, but it gave me more information than I had seen in 2 years. So what you see there, they clip it together. It says the United States versus Dorcas Allen. And then the clerk kind of just lists everything that happened, the verdict. It says not guilty. However, I had other evidence about the insanity plea. And then there was this, the indictment. Francis Scott Key then was the district attorney of Washington, D.C., and he wrote the indictment and he prosecuted the case. You can see here how sloppy it is. So I spent a good time really looking at this and thinking about why it was so sloppy. I looked at all the other records in the folder. Francis Scott Key was perfect in his writing. He did not make one mistake. Here he made a lot. First he writes Joseph Birch instead of James Birch. And Ben and I had been discussing this. Joseph Birch was also a well-known slave trader in the District of Columbia. Key probably knew him because he was involved in a lot of petitions for enslaved people trying to gain their freedom. So I think he may have known Joseph. So he should, Joseph. Oh no, what's that guy's name? James. Crosses it out, puts James. And then he makes a mistake about the child. Up there you can see he crossed out William Henry Allen and put Maria Jane. So he's not even sure who was the infant and who the 4-year-old was. To this day, I don't know either. Much of that is due to the dearth of record keeping for African Americans. Dorcas Allen had gotten married, and her husband's name was Nathan. And he was a free black man who had his papers. He worked at the National Hotel as a waiter, and they had 4 children together. Dorcas Allen had been liberated in word only, and she considered herself to be a free person when she was married. But the law does not consider anyone to be a free person if they don't have papers, and then the children follow the condition of the mother. That's how Birch was able to get the children, as well as Dorcas Allen. I can't find it in the census records. I don't know, I just don't know. My sense is he probably got it right here, which would have made Maria Jane the 4-year-old and William Henry the infant. But again, I'm not really sure. It's really horrific. He goes in detail to talk about malice and aforethought, how she killed them by strangling them and beating them. The newspaper article at the time said she was an unnatural mother, clotted in gore. All this happened in 1315 Duke Street. These were the best leads that I had too, because I knew that her attorneys had pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. And I also knew that there were people who testified for her, but I didn't know the names, but they were in the file. The names up top were killing me, but I was able to read them. Dr. Borer, Dr. Magruder, the two premier doctors in the District of Columbia. One of them specialized in insanity cases and had been a student of Benjamin Rush from Philadelphia. So they brought in some heavy hitters to defend her, really heavy hitters. Also, the women below, Eliza, I think Leiper, wasn't really sure. Sophia, I could never read that, and Delia Carter. I went to Mount Zion Church and I asked the historian there if they could find the records, because I knew that Dorcas Allen had attended Mount Zion Church and they were her buddies. So they were in these classes together. It's a Methodist church, and so they knew her intimately. Dr. Magruder had also treated her for epilepsy, which I thought was kind of interesting. So he was able to testify about that. And then in the center, Maria Orme. She was the wife of the man that sold them to James Birch. Maria Orme was the widow of the man that had freed Dorcas Allen. Okay, you follow me on this one? It's really kind of confusing. She remarried to a man by the name of Rezin Orme. So Orme was her second marriage. Rezin Orme was a terrible businessman. This was the Panic of 1837. He had a failed lumber business. And I thought, oh, he needed some quick cash. He needed some quick cash. And that's what he did. She wasn't hiding. They all lived in Georgetown. It wasn't like she was on the run. And this is another reality of enslavement too. I think the popular perception is that they were people living in the shadows, terrified. No, she was living her best life with her kids and her husband, who had a great job, right? Until somebody needed some money. The funny thing about Rezin Orme, when all this happened, he skipped town. And he left her, his wife, there to holding the bag. They tried to deliver the summons to her. She refused to take it, and she refused to come out of her room. And then at the bottom, William Washington, who was the coroner at the time, Robert Windsor, that's for you, Ben, John Kiffenduffer. These are all people that were members of the Watch, and they would have testified to what they found on the scene. So that gave me kind of, a lot of information to work with. But I still couldn't quite figure out the jury. Okay, so if the doctors are testifying that she's treated for epilepsy, everybody knows back then, even back then, that epileptics don't suddenly go into murderous fits, right? Everybody knows that. They even knew that back then. But insane? In this package, there was no notes of what was said. There was nothing in there about what they testified for her or against her, nothing. I had to kind of construct all that. But Judge Cranch told Adams there was no evidence of insanity presented. No evidence of insanity at the time of the murders, but she was acquitted by reason of insanity. What were the, why? I don't understand. But then I thought, I need to figure out who these guys are. And this is who they were. The guys that stood on that jury. Look at their profiles. They're working men. They're all working men. Not always enslavers. I think they want to be, right? Bricklayer, carpenter, paint merchant, bricklayer, all of that. I think there's two reasons why they acquitted Dorcas Allen by reason of insanity. Number one, If they had declared that she was guilty, then the state would have had to pay for her execution, right? And this wasn't something that generally they wanted to do. Ordinarily, they expected an owner to be responsible, but Thomas Birch is one of them, right? He's just a guy trying to make a living. I think they feel sorry for him. I think they have empathy for him. They don't really care so much about her. It's a guy who works among them, who operates in the same circles, and they want to do him a solid. They want to help him out. And by helping him out, acquits her in two ways. He gets her back, number one. She's acquitted. Birch gets her back. He gets his property back, right? Number two, if she's declared by a court to be insane, then he's got a lawsuit against the guy who sold her to him, because he paid $700 for 4 people. Now he's got 3, and one of them's insane and has no value, right? They have handed him the weapon that he can now use to go after Rezin Orme for selling him a defective slave. They gave it to him. I can't think of any other explanation why they would have done that. And that's exactly what is done. So, I forgot why I included this broadside. I think because it shows 1315 there, up in the corner there. And it is from the time period. I think it's from 1836, and it is included. So this is around the same time of the snow riots in Washington, D.C. And if you know about this, is in 1835 when, oh, it's too long of a story. I don't have the time to tell it. But it's on Francis Scott Key's watch as District of Attorney. There's rioting in the streets. It's about an African American who killed his owner. And there's rioting in the streets, and there's just general discord all the way around. Francis Scott Key, even though he was the one who prosecuted the case, he later told John Quincy Adams that he didn't want to prosecute it, that he wanted her to be returned to Birch. And I think for the same reasons why the jury wanted her returned. It also wants to keep it quiet. In the mid-1830s, the abolitionists are starting to gain ground. And Key does not want to give them the opportunity to get a hold of this. He wants to keep it as quiet as possible. That's my theory. Because I'm thinking, like, what does District Attorney Key care about this case? It's because of what happened the year before when Washington, D.C. was burning down for something just like this. So I thought, okay, I got Key's number now. I got him. I get it. So this is the advertisement in the paper that John Quincy Adams saw. The first time he sees it, he doesn't go. But what's interesting to me about this advertisement that Birch and the auctioneer put out is how honest it is. It mentions Dorcas Allen, her 2 surviving children, the other 2 having been killed by Dorcas in a fit of insanity as found by the jury who lately acquitted her. It's truth in advertising. Birch knows full well that nobody is going to come and buy her. This is a warning to Orme. This is a warning shot. He's sending it out like, I'm coming after you. This is for you, buddy. Meanwhile, Rezin Orme is in Ohio, and his wife is still locked up in her bedroom. Francis Scott Key even goes so far to bust into her house and into her bedroom and tries to shake her down. Where's your husband? Where's your husband? That's how strongly he feels about this and how angry he is about the whole thing, that he breaks into a sick woman's bedroom. I have a hard time believing that he did that, but indeed he did. So when Adams finally goes to this auction, what he sees will affect him profoundly. The 2 girls are hanging onto their mother, crying, weeping. I can only imagine that when Dorcas was in prison, that the 2 girls were being kept at 1315. I can't think of where else they would be. They were there without their mother. They had witnessed their mother killing their siblings, trauma, shock, I'm sure, for 2.5 months. Then when they're finally reunited with their mother, where do they find themselves? At an auction block. Nathan Allen is there. he meets John Quincy Adams, and he says, I am desperately trying to buy my wife. I am trying to buy her. Do you know of anyone who can help me raise the money to buy my wife? I need $400. That's what Birch said he would settle on, was $400. And John Quincy Adams was just like, oh, yes, I will give you $50. I pledge $50. He makes that pledge without thinking through what he had just pledged. That was before he talked to his cousin Cranch. That was before he knew anything about the details. He'd only seen this and gone to the auction. When he finds out all this stuff about, oh, she thought she was free, and does she really belong to Birch, and what's going on, what's the chain? He's a lawyer. He's trying to think of this in legal terms. But slavery and enslavement, you can't put it into a neat legal box. It doesn't fit and it doesn't work because it's horrific and cruel, and it's against natural law. So you can't apply the law to it. It doesn't work. But he is worried now because he's given his word as a U.S. congressman that he will help purchase an enslaved woman, and he'll give his own money to do it. And he thinks, what did I get myself into? If Birch is not the legal owner and I give the money to Nathan Allen, am I participating in an illegal sale? I don't know what to do. He asks his cousin, Judge Cranch. Cranch is like, stay out of it. He goes and talks to his family members, stay out of it. His wife begs him not to get involved. But Nathan Allen keeps knocking at his door. I love this. Nathan Allen could not care less about who this man is. He only knows that he owes him $50. Goes to John Quincy Adams' house every single day and knocks on the door and says, where is the money that you promised me? Where is it? I need that money. I need to buy my wife. Can you imagine? Knocking on the door of an ex-president, right? Being like, you owe me. I got it here, right here, $50. He also told John Quincy Adams he had found a benefactor who would put up the rest of the money. I'm just waiting on you, President, Congressman. I'm waiting on your $50. And meanwhile, my wife is being auctioned every single day, and I'm waiting on you. Puts the pressure on him. Finally, Adams says, okay, okay, I will write out the $50. But he doesn't write the $50 out to Nathan Allen, who, by the way, he calls an active but very ignorant man. Nothing could be further from the truth, right? John Quincy Adams writes the $50 out to the other man who put up the rest of the money, whose name was General White, very wealthy man who lived in Georgetown. So that way, Adams stays out of it because he writes the check to the white man, right, who then puts the money out. So if anything comes back to him, oh, I'm clean. I didn't write any check to a slave owner. It wasn't me. And that's when he writes in his diary, I'm not sure if the freedom of the woman and her children would be secured, but I just want to put this whole horrible affair behind me. And Nathan Allen goes down, and he gives us $450. That's how much it was finally costing to Birch. And it concludes. Nathan Allen and Dorcas and the two girls leave Washington soon afterwards, and they go to Rhode Island. I've been able to trace them to Providence. Nathan will die, I believe, in the late 1850s, and Dorcas Allen remarries in 1863 in the midst of the Civil War. She starts a boarding house, and she eventually is wealthy enough at the time that she dies in 1890 to leave property worth $6,000 to her children. She will have more children with Nathan. I don't think she had children in her second marriage, but she will have more children with Nathan. And they are the ones who will inherit that property. And it's still there in Providence. And it was only about 5 years ago that I found that out because the miracle of digitization and ancestry showed it to me and showed me her will. And there it was, as she wrote out, Dorcas Allen. What will become of Adams? Well, Adams goes on to defend the Amistad captives. But before he takes on that job, he does his homework. He does his legal homework. He does not get into it too much before he figures it out. It's in 1837, when he sees the realities of the cruelty and the horror, that he makes a very human decision and says, I want help, and then regrets it. And I think that's true of a lot of white people in that era. unless they are confronted with it, they stay away from it. Maybe they write about it, right? But when you're in it, I don't know. I think it's really illustrative in that regard. Birch, I always thought, like so many other people, that he bought 1315 along with the other dudes. What were their names? Price and Cook? No. Birch, Price, and Cook? Is that it?
Ballard. Was it Ballard?
No, that name, that famous, yeah, it's Price. And I always thought, oh, well, look at you. You just bought that place now. But Ben said, no, no, no. That was actually William Birch. And it looks like they all might have been related. So I was like, oh, well, what happened to him? And so Ben told me that it seems like he went into the hospitality industry. He left his slaveholding, slave trading behind, and he bought a hotel. Looks like he died around 1870. For the Orms, the ones who kind of started all this, Resin eventually comes back, and I can't really track them. I think they lived in Ohio for a while, then they come back and live with his daughter, and they also, too, will die in the 1870s. So, again, what to take out of this? I feel that the city of Alexandria has a remarkable property on its hands, and this story, I feel, tells so much about who we are as the United States of America and the importance of Alexandria and slave trading in Alexandria to the entire nation. And the fact that there were so many famous white people involved in this, and this story has not really yet been told, still confuses me. I wanted to give you a few resources. It is mentioned in Tamika Nunley's really good book, oh, there he is again, that she published a couple years ago. She used the article that I wrote for Washington History where I kind of summarized the whole case, and she does mention it's a really excellent book, so she puts it in the context of women, enslaved women in Washington, D.C. But aside from that, it shows up every so often. Somebody will publish a book and they'll kind of talk about it, but always from the John Quincy Adams side. Always from his side. And I think it's because it was in his diary that the story is kind of told. But I wish I could duplicate myself and work at my job, and then I could go with my other self and finish this work. I don't know exactly how, but I feel like I need to tell more. I want to know more about Nathan. I want to know more about what it was like to work as a waiter, to be a free African-American man, like moving in those spaces and living in Georgetown, and the life that they had and that created, that was just shattered in an instant. So I think that wraps up everything I wanted to tell you, and that was a lot. Oh, thank you. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. Yes?
I'm a New Hampshireite too, so we'll chat about that after. But how did you happen upon Dorcas Allen?
It was through his diary. And then I looked and I saw the advertisement. The advertisement I found pretty easily, even though I had to look at microfilm, which those days were horrible. With print like that. But yeah, I found it. And I was able to find that at the Queen Street Library. They did have the microfilm for that. Digitization, we need it.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. It's really fascinating. You're welcome. I wonder whether we heard Dorcas's voice in any of this, whether she had to testify. And
I left out that point. Yes, I have to tell you about that.
And also, I just assume, as I'm sure most people did, she killed her children because she didn't want them to be sold into slavery. Is that true?
I think so. I mean, because they didn't do a transcription, and I can't find any of Judge Cranch's notes that he would have kept. I mean, I've looked high and low, everywhere I've looked, I can't find anything. But according to what Judge Cranch told John Quincy Adams, when Dorcas Allen got on the stand, she said, yes, I killed my children, but they're in heaven. And I'm a Methodist. And she said, my mistress, meaning Maria Orm, was a Methodist, and she knows what's right, and I know what's right, and my children are in heaven. So that to me was proof positive that she was very aware of what she was doing and why.
Yeah, thank you, Alison.
Obviously, there was an article in the Gazette Packet in 1837 which talked about an act of barbarity
Right.
and like shock.
It was Edgar Snowden, I think, who wrote the
Yeah,
editorial.
he was no great liberal, that's for sure. But even he was shocked. But were there other newspaper accounts in D.C. covering this trial? That's one question. The second question is, in proper Alexandria, like clergy and things like that, was there any expression that we know of shock or concern about what happened? Or were we all just silent?
Okay, so the first answer is occasionally things will pop up. Ben had shared something that he found that was, I don't remember what it was, Ben, from a Philadelphia newspaper, an abolitionist newspaper. Yeah, at the time that I was looking for things, very few things were digitized. This was like 2005. I still had a flip phone. So I wasn't even like being able to take pictures of things. So I think they exist. I think they're out there. And the story that I read in the article that Ben sent me, it got the facts a little wrong, you know? So I thought, oh, that didn't surprise me, but I think it did make its way out there. And in the abolitionist newspapers, it was more summed up as, well, this is what we've been trying to tell you is going to happen. More things like this are going to happen. This is the inevitable result of enslavement and slavery and the evils of it. And then your second question, I find no evidence of anyone in Alexandria caring whatsoever. And let's try to get this problem away as soon as we can, because Washington City was burning a year ago, and we don't want that to happen in Alexandria. So just give her back to that dude, and then he could take her away, and we won't have to think about it anymore. Kind of like what Adams does.
I'm kind of shocked that she wasn't removed, like down to New Orleans, and tried to sell down there where the story wouldn't have been.
He wouldn't have been able to sell her. Nobody would buy her. A court had found her insane. She was valueless. Because of Birch's reputation as an honest dealer and his connections with Franklin Arfield, he would not have done something like that. It would ruin him and his reputation, which seems funny to say, but yeah. Although I think that what he was planning on doing was cutting his losses and selling the girls, because that would have been the least he could get. He couldn't get a hold of Resin Orm, who had left. There really wasn't anything that he can do. Is just try to get what he could out of it and move on. But there are court cases of people suing others for defective slaves. So had he pursued that, I think he would have won that case.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I was wondering if you've been able to find any primary sources from the perspective of the jurors, any of the jurors, and like any of their journals or diaries or letters or anything that, no? Okay.
No, I think they did their duty on that day, and they went back to work making their, ships and their barrels, and, they did my civic duty.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So
And
that's
that poor guy who was sold a defective slave, that poor guy. That's the only thing that I can logically think about is what they would have felt about this.
Right.
They spend no time deliberating it whatsoever.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. A number of years ago, we had a wonderful research project in the city of going through the court records and identifying what was going on with African Americans. And one of the things that became so interesting to me was that there are African Americans who have attorneys and win cases against slave owners, et cetera, et cetera. Could you explain something about the legal system that provides, are there defense attorneys? And it looks like these guys are pulling out all the stops. How is all of this working? And are the Quakers involved at all? Because I know they were very involved in making sure deeds for properties, wills are written. They were executors for many of the free blacks so that the neighborhoods, the properties, et cetera, were able to develop.
I'm sorry. So what is the core of your question? Well, Francis Scott Key defends a lot of African Americans when they will petition for their freedom, which is weird. He's a slave owner himself, and he fights tooth and nail in these freedom suits. And so a lot of them are pro bono. The ones that I've looked at, there doesn't seem to be any fee that's attached to it. In this case, the defense attorneys, I think they were people that Key asked to defend her, because he had a vested interest in her acquittal. So it's like he almost did everything he could to make sure that she was acquitted, which is perplexing to me because nobody was paying for her defense. They were court-appointed attorneys.
Who were they?
William Brent and, I forgot the other guy's name, but pretty well known. Their names pop up all over the place. Yep. I'm not sure if that was very fulsome, my answer.
So what was Francis Scott Key getting out of this?
Well, annoyingly enough, that man doesn't have any papers either. I have been high and low. If anyone finds them, I will be indebted to them for life. I tried so hard to get into his head. I really did. I can't figure him out. He will defend, you may have heard the Antelope case. It was a case in 1819 where kidnapped Africans, almost like an Amistad kind of case, he'll defend them and gain their freedom. But then he will also go tooth and nail protecting the rights of slave owners. He's very political. He is like good friends with Andrew Jackson, right? So we know he's not a good guy. And I don't know. I don't have an answer. He is one of the mysteries that I've never been able to understand. The only theory I have about him is he's a district attorney. He got a lot of heat during that snow rioting, and he did not want anything like that happening again. The fact that he goes into that woman's room, I still can't get over that. She's lying in bed. I'm sick. Please don't come in. And he barges in there and is like, where's your husband? I got to find him. I can't conceive of this. Right? It's not the story you hear about when you hear about Star Spangled Banner. But maybe we should talk about things like that instead of that song. I looked there too. Yep. So one of the founders of the Colonization Society in 1816, he's all over that. You know, his brother-in-law is Roger Taney. Boo, right? He is an enigma. He's a tricky one. I need his thoughts. When I went and I looked in places, I found poems that he wrote. Exactly, we know that. But I will say, 1812 Francis Scott Key is not the same person as 1830s Francis Scott Key, right? I mean, people, they change and they evolve and their white supremacy goes up and down. So by the time that this case rolls around, I'm not sure. He's very full of himself. Like, he's definitely a powerhouse around town, for sure. And I know that because of what other people said about him, and I trust them. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Here's the admission.